hope to have resolved the technical issues. It was a combination of the ClickShare and the Google Hangout causing CPU death. So we now have Steve Dahl doing a talk on moving to Preside and using multilingual sites, which he's done a lot of. So Steve, we kind of put a call out to do some talks and have people outside of Pixelate do talks, because I thought it'd be a nice thing to do. And we have Steve straight away volunteers. Steve is now working for Pixelate. Oh yeah. And it's also Steve's first talk. So gentle.
Be nice.
No heckling. So cool. Over to you, Steve.
All right. Okay. Hi. Now I've got my notes, but I'm only sharing one screen, so I've got no notes anymore. So this is going to be a little bit more free than I was hoping. So I'm very similar to that man there. I've been developing the Serum House since 1999. Worked in various incarnations of it. But I've been working with Preside since 2013. So the last time, and I was at Pixelate. So the last time I worked at Pixelate was when Don was hatching the Preside and working through designs and starting to rebuild it. So every day he'd come in from the train telling us that he built this new function and that new function. So it was really nice to come back to Pixelate. I'm working on a very, very mature product now. So yeah, it's now day 5 of Pixelate, so I started last week. And in my kind of 5-year hiatus, I guess, I've been working for a company called EPG Health Media, and I'm going to talk about the site that we built for them, our team built for them. But also a bit of a background, I've been kind of mainly a freelance developer for those, I can't work it out, for a long time. And in between doing that, I do a lot of stuff on winter sports. So I also run a thing called the World Snowball Guide, and I also run a company called Method Mag. So if you like snowboarding, to take a look. And if you are interested in my rabbitins, you can. I've kind of got an occasional blog that I add to on my corporate site, and you can take a look at me on LinkedIn. So, away. Hey, it's a bit of a lag. So, as Don said, I've not everyone has the luxury.
Ah, sorry. You crack on. I'll sort that out. You crack on. Don't worry.
That's wrong. Yeah. Not everyone has the luxury of starting from a brand new site, a total greenfield development. Most of the stuff that typically I've done, and probably a lot of you guys have done, is migrating the site away from some old CMS hopefully onto Preside. I've done quite a few of those now, and they typically are quite large sites. So I want to discuss some of those, not just the positives, but some of the things that I've kind of seen from my experience. Now, I'm not going to tell you how to migrate a site. There's tons and tons of resources out there. I particularly like moz.com for giving you a bit, not just how to build the site, but the whole kind of thing about it, thinking about SEO and making sure you don't lose any page authority, things like that. So do have a look on that. But my strategy for Preside has always been the same. Now I've migrated, I'm on to my 7th Preside site, I think I calculated earlier. And I've always started the same kind of way. I get my objects and my pages sorted out as soon as I can, and I start the migration process as early as possible. That way I kind of avoid putting in some nasty test data, and I'm always working on data that is true. So I haven't got titles that are typed in and got 20 characters, I've got titles that are maybe 200 characters. So I've got to deal with those from a design perspective and all of those. If I left the migration till the last minute, then quite often you've then got to make design changes and things like that. So I always do that. Get my data, pull it in from the old site as soon as I can. Then it's the fun stuff. I can kind of forget about migration for a while, build the site, and then I come back to it. And typically this is a bit of an iterative process, 1 and 2. I quite often go back and adjust my model, how I pull that content in. I might restructure about how I built it in Preside. So I'll keep on doing that, and finally when it's all kind of ready, I'll then start on the redirects and the sitemaps, and then finally once I've got a site live, I don't forget about it. I make sure that I'm logging every 404 that happens, because I'm making sure that all those redirects that I put in place are working and that I haven't missed any. It's a really, really vital thing just to make sure that you don't disappear off Google. So, anyway, a couple of sites. So I was talking, I used to work for a company, EPG Health Media, and the main site that they do is a site called EPG Online. Now, this is a site for healthcare professionals, so mainly doctors, surgeons, those kind of people, and they work in very specialist areas. And it's a European site, and we host lots of drug data. And prescription drugs in Germany are different from prescription drugs in the UK, from America, those kind of things. So we had an old site built in a SQL server and a kind of a proprietary CMS that we built. And we wanted to move away from Preside, and what we decided is that although we had drugs in German, if you wanted to register, that whole process was in English. If you, all the navigation into these areas, which the German drugs were in German, how to administer these drugs, although that was in German, all the other signposting was all in English, so it wasn't a true multilingual site. So what we wanted to do was create a whole multilingual experience. We built this new version of EPG, which I'll show you in a second. And it's in 8 languages, but more importantly, this is more geographical based. So our Germany edition is in German. Our Spanish edition is in Spain edition is in Spanish, things like that. Because prescription drugs are local to that region. You might have some drugs which are not available in certain countries. You didn't say Spanish or Portuguese because Brazilian have a different set of drugs than Portugal does, although they speak mostly Portuguese. I'm going to flip and just very, very quickly show you the site. And I'm going to come back to this a little bit more when I start talking about migration. When I talk about multilingual. So that's EPG Online. And another one this is the first one I converted, so my method man. This was on Drupal, on MySQL, and it had about 250,000 pages. So part of the migration process, when I started looking through a lot of kind of the page ranking of a lot of the pages, they were just crappy pages. They were just pages with maybe one image, very low text that would have been indexed on Google. That was kind of pulling down the overall ranking of the site. So part of the migration strategy should always be, do you really need to move everything across? So in a particular case of Method Man, I ditched about 2/3 of the pages because they were just low ranking, rubbish content, just haven't been updated in years. So it's a good opportunity just to throw away that stuff and just move on to the good stuff. So that was Method. And what I'm doing at the moment is, it's another guide. Google keeps on telling me whenever I go to Google that this site is mobile compliant and it's really old now, and so it's about time I moved on to Preside and it's all nice. And again, it was SQL Server, it was using my own kind of CMS that I built. The migration path was really, really simple. Got a bunch of pages, moved it onto a bunch of pages. There's nothing particularly complicated about it, but it is quite long-winded, and there's about 30,000 pages, all of which I really need to migrate, and it's really, really important for this. I don't lose any SEO on it. At the moment, 90% of the traffic comes from Google, and if you kind of Google snowball pretty much any place in the world, I'm normally #1. And if I lose that, I won't get any more free trips, so I'll be gutted. So that's the World's Novel Guide. But I want to quickly pop back to EPG Online. In an ideal world, what do you do when you migrate from one site to another? You just want to be able to turn off the old CMS. Everything's now on Preside. You can kind of forget about it. EPG Online. There was a reason why I wanted to demo it. If I had my notes, I'd be able to show you. But eProject Online has a bunch of these things that we call learning zones. And now it's got lots of annoying pop-ups. Not my day. So we've got a bunch of learning zones, and these are all set up as sub-sites in Preside. So these talk about very specific treatments for diseases. The idea is to raise awareness of them. You'll see at the bottom there's a little logo, Novartis. So what happens when we build these sites, it has to go through a process where it goes through their accreditation system. And typically what we have to do, we have to submit print screens of every single page to Novartis. They then put it through their thing, make sure it's all compliant, because although it's on our platform, it's Novartis sponsored, and if they get reported because they're talking about something which is off-label or they shouldn't be talking about it, they can get fined millions. And all the other pharma companies that potentially do treatments in those areas want to try and get these guys to slip up, trying to get one over on each other. So what we have to do is that we had a load of these on an old CMS, but when we moved to Preside, we couldn't just move all of these, because one thing, we didn't want to keep the old look and feel, and the second one, it was too risky just to move everything in Preside and expect it to look exactly the same. And there was a whole bunch of functionality we wanted to build as well. So what we did, when we moved to Preside, we moved the main site to Preside, and kept all of this stuff on using our own CMS, which we had a lot of head scratching about how on earth we're going to do that. Because once you log into the main site, we wanted that login to follow through. We wanted to be on the same server, same everything. So the way we did it, and the way, if you're in the same position as we were, is we created a root handler. So, you may know root handlers in Preside, it kind of mimics. It looks like a page, but it's not a page. It's a root handler, and that will inspect the URL to work out which particular handler to then fire. So because all of our old learning zones sat on specific URLs, whenever a request came in, we could use a root handler to determine whether that was an old part of the old site, and if it is, we could then push it into a different handler. So what we did, we created a legacy handler, and all of that really crappy old application.cfm CFC code, we copied pretty much verbatim out of the old application.cfc, chucked it into our root handler, and we also created a kind of a legacy service as well to do some other bits and pieces. But that was really all we had to do to get it working. We didn't change any of the application variables, application.so-and-so. We didn't change any of the referencing to sessions or cookies or anything like that. The code was pretty much exactly as it is. Bunged it into our legacy handler, and all the old code we kept separate. So we created a CF mapping that pointed to the old code, and all the old assets as well. We didn't bother doing some kind of regex to turn all the images into asset links in Preside, anything like that. We just kind of created a virtual directory so that we remapped all of the old URLs would still work, all the old images, all the old links to PDFs would still work, and the site worked as is. The only bit we had to change was the login. So inside our request handler, how we handled the login was slightly differently. But we could also do a single sign-on between admins. So once you logged into Preside admin, it could also log you into our other admin. So for about a year and a half, all new sites were built using this new functionality in Preside as a sub-site, and gradually as clients left, or as they renewed their project, in which case that had to be upgraded, we moved them gradually over to Preside. So that was extremely low risk, and a year and a half later, we finally managed to turn off the old code in its entirety. So everything is now on Preside. And it did work incredibly well, much to everyone's surprise. So back to migration. So as I said, the process that I've used up until now has been pretty much the same. It's got slightly more sophisticated as I've gone on, but the key for a lot of this is that I always add a legacy ID to any objects that I migrate, whether that's, so if I'm bringing in a list of countries, or an EPG online, I might have a list of specialties or diseases, I will always tag in the new one what that legacy ID was in my old system. So what I would do in CF admin, I'm going to create a data source that points to that old one, and I'll basically, if I'm migrating across countries, I'll write a bit of SQL that will go to my old CMS, get that data out, present it normally in a single view if I can help it, and then I'll just iterate through that in a service, and then add it into Preside. Now, when I first started it, I did play around trying to do it all in SQL. You know, I've got a SQL server, I've got my SQL, how hard can it be? Forget about it. One of the things Don told me about very early days is the best documentation on Preside is Preside itself. So do inspect those objects. You know, there's some things like the site tree service and the asset manager. Use those functions built into it. Don't try and cobble together your own. Use their services. It's built into Preside. Do all your migration itself. So when you add a page, use the core Preside function to add a page. Don't try and do it yourself. That way you'll make sure everything else fires, and all any kind of interceptors that need to run, or search indexing and all that kind of stuff will still work as well. So what I do, I add legacy ID to any objects. I also ensure that any script I do can pick up when it fails, because invariably it's going to fail lots of times. And also, when I'm slowly building this up, maybe I don't want the entire database, maybe I just want a set of test users that I'm building in before I do the full migration. So I've got to make sure that this thing can run multiple times. And step 3 is I always try and make sure that I build up my Preside database, starting with objects that have no kind of relationships. So I'll build in my standard data, my job titles, my person titles, whatever you call them, my countries, anything like that first, and then slowly build up the ones that relate to that. So I then build in my user, and that user I can then connect to the country that they're residing in, things like that. So I'll build it all up, and finally, once I've got all my data, all my pages, all my objects, then where I've got kind of many-to-many relationships, at that stage I'll then migrate all those across. And then, as I said earlier, finally I start to think about doing my redirects. And the safest way of migrating any other things as well is that any static assets that are still required, I'll chuck them onto a new server, create a virtual directory, rather than try and parse the kind of the old HTML if I've got some kind of hard-coded images in there. I don't tend to do that. You could do, and then you can make sure those images fit that your kind of screen perfectly. I don't tend to do that. What I'll try to then do is make sure that sufficient time will then be put in by whoever's managing the site to make sure that those pages that are of high value have been manually checked, just to make sure that they are looking really good. You know, I can automate most of it, but I still want to make sure that I haven't taken any assumptions, that I make sure all those pages are checked, that they're really valuable pages on the site. And if images need changing, because I've typically got a new design, it may need reformatting anyway. So that's what I do. So I'm going to quickly show you a little bit. Okay, so it's talking about migrating things. So it's more there.
That's good. That's good.
So this is a typical kind of function I might have that, in this particular case, migrates and user across. Now, I'm going to show you in a second, but I'm using the ad hoc task for this. So it means I can use the logger and I'll show you this way. I get to see all the stuff being outputted. Plenty of error checking in here. So basically what I'll do first off, I'll hit my migrate service first. I'll get all my old data from my old database, and I just look through it. You know, it's not particularly complicated. First off, again, using my legacy ID that I've added, I'll make sure that this doesn't exist already. I don't duplicate data. And what I do as well, if I look at my object, what I do here, I was talking about adding IDs and things like this. As I'm sure you know that it kind of layers up. So you've got your core, and then you've got your extensions, and then you've got your site, and then you've got your sub-site on top of that. I think that's the 4 layers. So adding a legacy ID, I can just kind of extend using the, as long as it's in core, add that ID into my page, and then it's suddenly available on every page. And I do that exactly the same with my asset. So again, on my asset, I've got my... now, once you've done this, you can just delete that afterwards, depreciate that field if you like, tidy up your database, no one will ever know. But also, what I quite often do, I'll leave that on. I find it's quite useful. You never quite know when you need that link back into your old legacy ID. It doesn't take up much space on your database. But what I will often do is then remove that from the form, so that when someone's editing this page in the future, they can't see this page ID that I've added into the bottom. So I'll often take that off the form and leave it in there because, yeah, you never know. So I've checked here, it doesn't exist. So now what I'm going to do, this particular news story has got an image. So what I'm going to do is import that image. So the way I've done the image import is I've got a import image function here. Again, I checked it exists. If it exists, I just send back the ID and kind of happy days. The way I've got the images, rather than copy them over or create some kind of link between the 2 servers, usually all the images that I've got can be publicly accessible via HTTP, but they're not necessarily publicly known. So what I've done in the past is just use the HTTP service, pull in the original image as binary, and check that it doesn't error, and then I'll then figure out where I'm going to store it in the asset folder. And again, it's important to think about not just putting in thousands of images from your old site, because when you want to use that image, it's just going to be meaningless. I try and structure the location of those images so it's in a folder that's representative of where I can find it maybe in my old site. In my case, with a ski resort, I'll make sure that I've created an asset folder of the name of that ski resort and store that image in there, just so that I can find it easy. So when I do a search in the asset library, it comes up underneath the folder name, so it's got some kind of meaning to me. So and again, core services, asset manager, add folder. So always try and do things like that. And then finally, I have my asset. So I've got my file, my binary file that I use the HTTP service. I've created my file name, I've chosen my folder, and the asset data includes any kind of copyright and that kind of stuff that I'm doing. And again, my legacy ID. So that's how I handle those. And then finally, so I've got my image, and now I just add it. Now, with this particular migration, it's all pages. I've decided to go down a really easy route of just having stacks of pages on the site. So again, I'm using the site tree service to add my page, all the kind of the basic stuff. again, make sure date created, date modified, try and pull back those old ones, not today's date. Make sure you, otherwise suddenly when you do research, everything's been added today. And that's kind of, that's really all there is to it. So, I'll quickly show you. So this is my kind of staging site. So, again, another good reason for doing it. Originally, I was going to structure my site tree so that I had a section called resorts, and inside my resorts I was going to have all of my snow resorts. And that was originally how I wanted to structure it. I had some problems with SEO trying to get properly indexed some of my pages where they're in about 4 levels deep or in a site. The ones that have maximum of 3 levels seem to perform better than my other ones. So the current structure of my site was kind of resort, country, region, name of resort. I wanted to move it away so that I could bring these pages, which are in high ranking kind of resort / Whistler by HTML. That was the idea. And that was how I originally did it. Brilliant. I then opened up my site tree, tried to open up my file that got results, and it's got to put in 1,200 pages. So okay, that's not really going to work. And I didn't really want it to do it so that, because you can turn them off so that all the pages aren't shown, so you get the little list, which is fine. I don't know if you've seen that, but underneath each resort page, I've got a bunch of other pages, so I couldn't then do it that way. So because I've done this early enough in my migration process, I was able to kind of rethink how I'm going to do it. So I've kind of changed it now so that they're now still can take a while. Should have been the US. So here's my US ones, and then underneath I've got my my pages. So now on the left, as Seb was showing earlier, you can customize all of this stuff. So for the migration process, I knocked up this little thing on the side, beautiful looking screen, and this steps me through kind of everything in the order that I want to do it. Now, when I click on one of these, this runs a ad hoc task. So I'm able to use a logger, output everything, and because this one's already been done, you can see it's been skipped. I was only interested in putting in new stuff, not updated stuff. I don't really, once something's been added, I don't tend to update it. It's not a big deal if you wanted to kind of do it so that you can just add it, but it would update it every time. But on this particular case, it just adds it. Once it's been added, next time it runs, it skips it. I was showing you news earlier, and news is one of the bigger ones. So if I run the news, you can see most of them, you can see page skipped. But as I've done this for a while, there's probably going to be a few added. So this is connecting to my live server. So on my SQL server, I've opened up a port so that I can see my my database outside of the server that it's on. This just connects to it via a standard UC data source. It's pretty quick. I can leave this running while I go back to it. As I was saying earlier, legacy ID, make sure these scripts can be run multiple times. Put it in a kind of a nice structured order so that I can make sure that any related data is already there before I migrate that thing. Finally, my redirects. So my redirects are doing exactly the same as anything else. If I go up to the code, I've got a redirect somewhere. so the redirects, I'm using the redirector. Again, check it exists. And finally, I'm inserting it as a link, and then as a redirect rule. Now, the only other thing that you've got to bear in mind is if you try to hit a Preside site with a .cfm extension, it doesn't like it. So what I've had to do is kind of hack a little bit the application.cfc a bit to allow these to go through. Otherwise, I've had it that any .cfm extension, although I've had it as a redirect, I'll just get a blank page. It doesn't work. So I've had to do this nasty stuff, and maybe I'll speak it down a bit.
Yeah, I think your rewrite XML, I think, can be tweaked to allow them through. I think that's what it is. But
okay. That's what I've done in the meantime, and I'll change it later. So anyway, it's now finished, and down at the bottom you can see that it's
not finished. It's 99%.
It's always 99.
oh, is it?
Yeah.
Why is no one raised a bug?
Yeah. Almost perfect. So at the end, it's all skip, and then finally I've got a few pages that have been added, and then if I go. So these are the pages that just been added. So the images have been nice and crisp. I haven't got any focal points set. So I've got a few heads been chopped. Which is because I've got no real control over those images. So typically what I do after this is go in and probably reset those images on a one-to-one basis. So you can't expect perfection necessarily. So that's that, and because I've added it through this way as well, through the Preside services. If I go into search, I shouldn't have to re-index anything. It should just be there. Okay. I'm sure it will be, but I'm still trying to do the search results. I'm sure it's there somewhere. Okay, so that's migration. I now kind of gone through it pretty quickly. Before I move on to modular sites, are there any questions on kind of migration? By the way, this site runs on IIS on Windows. And I've done a custom kind of web config for IIS. I'm happy to share if anyone's as crazy as me. Not everything has to be on the same. EPG Online though is on Ubuntu and Nginx, that kind of stuff. Yeah, so Preside does work perfectly well on plenty of different web servers. Any questions at all on that?
Yeah, one about the migration script. It looks like it will blow if you have a lots of data in there. It's all in one handler or whatever it is, or in one service. So if you feed in like 100,000 pages, I think you will run in a out of memory error probably. How do you deal with that? Or I saw you split it up in the admin interface, but that's if you have too many objects, that's probably not very useful. So
yeah, it's totally. It's for example, when we did EPG Online migration, we not only, when we ran it live, we not only had to add our users, we had to send them an email, getting them to put new credentials in it. So that we did split up. So I wouldn't do the entire database of our users. I did it a subset at a time, ran it once, ran it for a second time. It could pick up exactly where it left off. It knew that record, that user had been processed and where it went. So yeah, look at your strategies. It's nice and easy to do it the way I've done it for this particular site because it's fairly small. You know, we're not talking. The trickiest one is the results. So I've got 1,200 results, and it creates 6 pages for each as it processes those, as well as pulls in sometimes about 10 images per result. That all still ran as one great big thing. The output that you saw there did kind of make it a bit tricky to scroll down because I put a lot of kind of debugging into it. But yeah, you know the size of the database you transfer in, and yeah, certainly, you know, if you are putting in 100,000 pages or something, adjust your strategy to do it in blocks, for sure. Okay. Right, multilingual sites. Read the docs. There we go. Right. It's kind of strange because when we were building ePG Online, it's been live now for 2.5 years, I think. Multilingual sites were, I think Alex said 80% done.
Yeah. It's not a number, really.
Yeah. So we learned an awful lot of stuff about building multilingual sites way before the documentation was produced. But now the documentation on multilingual sites is pretty good. And to be honest, technically, it's pretty straightforward. But, you know, the documentation covers most of the stuff. I'm going to show you a little bit of a demo. That's, you know, it's straightforward. There's not really technically anything difficult about creating multilingual sites in Preside. The way we've done it on ePG Online is every time we create a microsite, you can choose a language of that microsite. So we might have, say, a site that talks about asthma. And for that might be in 5 languages. What we do, we create 5 subsites for that, rather than try and do any kind of page kind of translation. That's for SEO reasons. Also, it doesn't really handle it. The UI's not in there for it, is it? But also, typically these sites aren't exactly 100% translations. So what we might say in asthma for our English one might be slightly different from our German version of it. It might have slightly different content. The English language one might be able to get more updated quicker because we've got better resources in-house to update that information. So it tends to be that on the page level, a page is one language. But our problem really was trying to figure out how we can, as an English company, how we can handle creating a site that's in 8 languages and spread across 11 geographical regions. So first off, you've got on any site, you've got some copy on it that just never changes. So like your button that says search, you're never going to change that. Whereas you will have some other copy on the site, some more kind of marketing style copy that is going to change. So if I go back to ePG Online homepage, we have some copy here, this kind of little bit here, trying to persuade you to log in or try to persuade you to register. So marketing might try and do some kind of A/B testing on that to try and work out what works, what doesn't work. So they need to be able to edit this on a fairly regular basis. So there's a couple of ways you could do this. Typically, a lot of the multilingual content you'll store in IATN files, but then every time they want to change this, it's going to be a developer task to release those changes onto a server. So you can't go down that route. You could add these as fields into your login page and then set that login, that object to be translatable, and then you can go and edit this. That's a nice, easy way. But in this particular instance, what we did, we created our own little object, really simple object, kind of called it micro content or something like that. Made that translatable, and then built a widget and a couple of helpers that allowed us to kind of just to drop this in various ways. The helpers allowed us to easily put it into views, and the widgets allowed people to drop multilingual content into anywhere. And then the widget itself is aware of the language that surrounds it, and therefore will present that language if it's available. So figuring out what copy fits into each of those kind of buckets is actually really important. Other big problem is getting copy signed off. So if you've got kind of one megalomaniac who kind of controls everything, then it's nice and easy. But typically what you have is a bunch of stakeholders, each with their own different opinion on what each bits of copy should say. And you might have, in our case, regulatory reasons as well why copy has to be checked to make sure it's compliant with various, or we can't say that, or we shouldn't make that claim, and things like that. So getting copy signed off before you put it off to translation is really important. Translating the content. Now, there's plenty of kind of APIs in there where you can kind of upload content or do it dynamically, which makes makes life really easy. In our particular case of EPG Online, it was health copy. A lot of the terms that we use, if we use their literal translation, it's not going to work. So what we had to do was use a specialist agency in order to get that copy kind of properly translated, and then we used another kind of part of that agency who would verify using separate translators that copy was okay. It wasn't just someone who put something in and we just used it verbatim, because it's our reputation at stake. You know, if we said something in German that wasn't, that was laughable, then no one's going to believe a single thing we put on the site. So we had it translated, then we had it independently verified, and then once that's done, we can then put it onto the site. So translating is a big problem, or can be a big problem. I'm not sure which slide. Okay. That's where my notes would have come in handy. And then finally adding it to a site. So what we did in the end, once we decided, okay, well, this search button is going to be called search. It's not going to be called find it. All the stakeholders finally agreed to that. It's going to be called search. We know it's not going to change. That can go into IETN. So in Preside, and I'll show the IETN stuff in a bit, but you've got a bunch of files, your IETN, your Java property files. So you put all the content into there. And what we did, we just gave very clear instructions to the translation company. We zipped up that folder with all of our IETN files that we wanted translating, excluding the kind of the admin ones and all those kind of things, all the ones that were going to be on the website, the facing website, zipped them all up, gave them instructions, says when you're doing your German translation, take the file called general.properties and call it general_de.properties. And everything on the right-hand side of the equal sign, that's what you need to translate. Do not translate the stuff on the left-hand side, because otherwise it's just going to go bang. So we gave them very clear instructions of that, zipped up our IETN files, gave it to the translation company, and then crossed our fingers and waited for an email to said, how do you do it again, or what's a zip file, or it came back in a couple of weeks, and it was beautiful. I was just able to unzip that, drop it straight into the application, framework reunit, bang, it worked. I was amazed, absolutely amazed, and so was everyone else. So the IETN stuff was really nice and straightforward. The other stuff, so the other stuff is kind of this, this marketing things, the email copy, the forgotten password, the thanks for registering, the reminder emails, all those ones came on kind of Word files and these kind of things. do not underestimate the amount of effort that takes to get that copy into the back end of Preside. Trying to copy paste, as you know, copy paste the stuff from Word into an email template in Preside. It's just yeah. Even when you clean it up, even when you give good instructions, it still looks particularly bad. You've got to factor in the fact that you need to test this email to make sure that, although it looks okay, that it does render properly in every kind of, on your mobile, on your phone, on Outlook, on Gmail. So translator copy and adding to the site is very important. And then also moving forward. So you've got your website, you've got it launched, and then suddenly marketing decide that they would like to change that login copy because it's not snappy enough, or because they've got a certain a promotion. They'll give you some copy, and you're happy with it, but you can't just put that live. You need to put it onto your staging environment. You put it onto the staging environment, and suddenly, because you've only got a small space, when you actually see it in reality, it's pushed down half of this, the login's down here, and you can no longer actually log in. So you then got to go back down to marketing and get them to change it again, and get it released to staging. And then when it's finally done on staging and looks good, you've got to move that to live. So all of these things are complicated. So translation is, as I've said, technically, it's no big deal. But your business has to be ready for being able to do that. So basically, hindsight. In hindsight, when we did EPG Online, we kind of said a lot of the copy is going to change. So let's put a lot of the copy so that users can edit it, or admin can edit it. The reality was, they never did. Very rarely was it actually changed. That adds a lag onto the speed of the site, because every time a page renders, it's got to pull all this stuff from the Preside object. Every single one of those is a little query, so it increases the delay on that page to get rendered. So hindsight, I would do it the opposite way. I'd get as much stuff in ITN files and then slowly move it down into kind of these micro-content widgets, or in a form as and when it's needed. The final copy, the translation, these kind of things, having someone who owns the site, owns the content, who can make those decisions for you, rather than you have to go to 5, 6 different stakeholders to get approval for a piece of copy. Having some person that owns that process, that's the way you want to go. Translating the content, if you can use an API to pull it in and build some nice little functionalities, there's probably an extension that allows you to do it, or if not, there should be someone to write it, that could connect to one of the various, there's plenty of them out there. Something like that would be fantastic. Amends, again, it does need to be tested in staging, so you need some nice way of moving that data out of an object and put it into production in an easy manner. So lots of things to be learned from that, and we then produced another site for a big company. It's called MedSmart Online, and for that one we learned from these. So everything was ITN, unless it really had to be something else. But 99% of the content was ITN. We had a single stakeholder to sign off the copy. Translation of the content, they did it internally because they were able to do that. And again, the ITN worked amazingly well. Gave them a zip file, they returned it back, put it in, boom, worked. And amending and moving copy changes, they were happy to do a lot of that themselves, but because they had really put an awful lot of thought into that language, they found that they didn't have to think about changing those things as much as needed. So lots and lots of lessons that we learned from that process, and we used them in the next project. So, technically, as I said at the start, you can read the docs. They are good on this topic. So first off, I've got a slide for each of these ones, so I'll quickly rabbit through these. You can enable the option, Michael said, said about this at the start of his 101. You enable the option, and you start deciding which objects you want to be translatable. And as Michael said as well, you know, if you've got in our case, like a specialty, like someone is an expert in surgery, the word surgery won't translated, but if that refers to a specific kind of code in some European red tape, that doesn't need to be translated. That's going to be the same every single time. So so you need to think about which things you're going to translate, which need to be translated. Then you can start adding your ITN. So you want to be moving all your stuff away from being hard-coded into ITN files, ready for that. You can create your translation widget, which is something that we've done quite a lot of to allow you to kind of drop in that. Layout changes. What you need to be able to do is a user needs to be able to select their language. So you need to, typically you'll put that in the header or maybe the footer or somewhere. So you need to be able to have them to be able to change their language, or in our case their region. You need to make some request changes. So just make sure that every time someone requests a page, it gets served in their language, the language that they want it in. And then really what you want to be able to do as well is present it initially in the language that you feel is most appropriate for that user. And it's not always, I am in Germany right now, so show me the German version. There are other ways to do it. So I'm going to quickly take you through those. So, config.cfc, just add this bit here. So again, I've got an amazing site. So there we go. Just bung it in there. This is the standard basic site. So Preside new site, basic one, and I've just added a couple of things here. That's all I've changed along the top. Seems quite a lot. So that's. And then, as Michael said, as soon as you do that, do a framework reinit or reload all, then you can see your content translations, which are under your system menu. So you go into here and settings, content translations. So this is where you set your language, your default language, and then any additional ones that you want. Now, as soon as you've done that, any objects that have been set to be translatable will show. So in order to set your objects, really simple, say multilingual for your overall object, and then any fields that you want, you put multilingual as true. So if I go, I haven't got many objects, I've got one object. I've got my country one. So all I've done, I've got multilingual true on the component, and the only thing that I want translatable is the title. It's a bit of a weird demo, hopefully it'll make sense. And then if I now go into my data manager, got a bit of ITN missing, so this is my countries, and I've got my three. So you'll see here now, you've got your translation status. So I've selected 3 languages, and you can change this at any time. So if I want to, just for the hell of it, add Spanish. Then if I then just refresh this. I've got my 3, but I've also now got Spanish. So you can see with the red, it's not been translated. So this site's in Spanish, and this particular word is not in Spanish. When it's shown, what it will do, it will just revert back to your default one, your English language one in this case. So, so if I now, whereas before the default action, if I want to edit this, I can either select the particular language I want to edit, or if I just click edit, then I'm editing all of the fields here. But I can then flip through and select French. French and French is bad. Let's do French and German. So, as I said earlier, the only field I want to be translatable is the title. So this is that. Okay. Now, so now talking about your copying your views and that kind of stuff. So rather than hard code stuff, what you want to be able to do is to use this this kind of translate resource in your views, and automatically when that view is rendered, it's going to figure out what language you're in, and therefore take the content that is in the appropriate I8N file. So the way it works is the first bit. Where's my mouse gone? This bit here, general. That's effectively the name of your file and your location. So if it was website.geml, then you'd have a folder called website, then a file called geml in there, and your language.submit.label is the bit that's in the file. So if I go here and I have a look at my I8N, so I've got a geml. So it's geml, it's in the roots, therefore I do geml and then geml colon language.submit.label equals change. And then to do this in German, all I do, I create a German file just with the underscore dot e. Is that correct?
No.
That was Google. See, never trust Google. It's not my fault. So I've just got a geml.de.properties file, put in my dodgy German. What should it be?
Bang, job's done.
Italian.
That's it. That might have been user error. There's a good chance of that. Okay, yeah. So that's all I do there. And then for the other stuff as well, where you don't want an I8N, you can create your object to hold your translations that you want to do on the fly, make that translatable, and then you can create a widget that allows you to kind of drop it in various places. So that's a thing that we've done quite a lot. Finally, well not finally, you want to be able to change your language selection. So again, by default, in the docs, it says about using the multilingual Preside object service. Again, list languages will pick all those languages that you saw in the admin, and then you can just display those, and then nice and easy. What we did, because it comes for the one demo that I've got there is more regional based. You could have a region, a language that can have multiple regions. So that's the way we kind of split it out. So we would show all the regions, and then each of those regions is tagged to a language. So in your view, where is it? Yeah, so what I've done here, I've just done a little viewlet here, render viewlet demo.show languages, and in my demo, I've got a very simple one. I've got demo servers, I get all my countries, pass it into my view, so a render view for language selector. I'm just looping through. You can use event.getLanguage to get the current language, so that I can then loop through, select the one that's currently in use, and that's it. And then down the bottom, I've got my translate resource for the label. Now, the important bit really is your request. So in your handlers, you need to create a geml.cfc, and on your request start, this is very important to make sure that everything else still works. This little bit code here just really allows me to action when that language drop down is changed, then it will then change the language to that. What I do here, I save that in a cookie, and I've got this set language function here, which I use multiple times, and this checks that that it's a valid locale, because sometimes I set this based on the browser. In my particular case, the locale might not be valid, and if it's not, it defaults the language to English. I then set the language, and then I save that in the session scope. Now, this is on kind of every request. Once it's in the session service, you don't need to do it again, but that was there. So what I do, the first time we go to the site, I'm going to figure out what language I think I'm going to show you. I'll save that in the session. Every request that's going to be in the session, I'm just going to use that. If you override it, so if I go back to this demo and change it to French, so now that button's in French. Well, it's not, but and this is in. Change it back to UK, change it to German. So that's how this works. This is an interesting one, which I'm going to quickly gloss over, why the admin bar. So that's that. Now, the other thing I wanted to mention, point 7, was basically code to set the language automatically. So there was a couple of ways you can do it. In HTML5, you can obviously, it asks you to, if you want to tell your location, everyone always goes, no, you can bugger off. So it's not something I tend to use. You can obviously do an IP lookup. There's IP to country and various kind of APIs, things that you can pull. But again, you do have that lag, and it costs a little bit of money. So you can do that. Quite often I'll look at the language of the browser rather than select it based on your IP, because especially for EPG Online, where you might be a doctor, English language doctor at a conference in Spain, I don't want the site to be in Spanish. You know, if you're, so I'll set it to be English because I know that that's your language browser, so I quite often do it on that. The other thing we can do as well, and I've done it for another site, is if you use Cloudflare, it's got a little option in Cloudflare that then pass in the language. So then you inspect your request header in your request, and you can pull out CF IP country or something. So that tells you your locale of the, so you don't have to, and it's free, and it works, and it's really quick. So that's my kind of preferred one. So so we ditched kind of using any kind of IP lookup, any third party. We use either based on the browser language or use the stuff from Cloudflare, and it's been pretty good. So so that's how we've set the language. Anyway, that's it. 4 minutes late, sorry.
No.
As I said, thanks very much. If you do want to, what I've tried to do, I'll try and create some blog articles on what I've done here and bang it up by this time next year, maybe. Okay, cheers. Oh, any questions, by the way?
Thank you, Steve. Niall is just back. I suggest we take 5 minutes and then crack back